The fight began. Curtis was seen starting to chase Tessia. Arthur, who was watching, knew that Curtis might not be able to defeat Tessia, but he could hold her off for a while. Meanwhile, Lucas was seen approaching him. Arthur had thought that he would be more humble to enter the academy immediately, but it turned out that his guess was wrong. Lucas then asked what was taking Arthur so long, and he guessed that it was because Arthur was afraid of losing his reputation if he lost that day. From above, Glory was still watching from atop the torch. Arthur understood that everyone wanted a show. Therefore, he took out his sword and protected himself with mana, then moved quickly to attack Lucas. Lucas immediately took out his magic wand to shape and burn, obey the order and confine those standing in front of him. He used the magic of Inferno's cage. Just then, the power of fire began to appear and circle around Arthur. The boy immediately dodged the flames and blew them away with his wind power. Although successful for a moment, the ring of fire eventually formed and Lucas began to attack using hundreds of fireballs aimed at Arthur's body. Arthur began to dodge, and Lucas was pleased that his enemy was beginning to look troubled. That's when Sylvie asked if Arthur was okay. Arthur replies that he's fine, but he wants to know about the other conditions. Sylvie says that Tessia has won against Curtis. Meanwhile, Claire won against Clive. Arthur understands and asks Sylvie to let him know if anything unusual happens. Arthur refocuses on Lucas, who now has a bigger mana pool than when he was an adventurer. Arthur started to step forward, and Lucas attacked him again with the power of fire. Arthur realized he wouldn't be able to fight Lucas' power without the fire or water mana attributes, and his mana pool wouldn't be able to keep up with him either. Lucas then said that he was glad he didn't join the disciplinary committee. If he was on the same team as an incompetent person like Arthur, then he could have been expelled from school. Arthur knew that he couldn't use a wind spell big enough to counter Lucas' strength. Even when Arthur tried to attack, Lucas' fire managed to injure his hand. In that desperate situation, Arthur forced himself to think and focus on the fire. He thought of wind magic, which is simply pushing and pulling, and manipulating the air to achieve the desired effect. But what if he manipulated the air particles themselves? Arthur thought that maybe he could get rid of the very thing that the fire needed to keep burning: oxygen. Arthur, who is starting to get overwhelmed, looks at Lucas, who asks if that's how he defeated the professor by running. Arthur wondered if he was fast enough to put out the fire before it got to him. The most important thing was whether he could still breathe at that time. But suddenly Arthur wondered why he had to think about it so hard, since it was the reason he went to school. Professor Glory, who was still watching the battle, saw Lucas, who was much better than she had heard. Inferno Cage was one of the tougher fire attribute domain spells, but he could already use it very skillfully at such a young age. Moreover, Lucas' mana reserve looked almost the same as a silver core mage. Professor Glory felt that the world had changed so much and parents would likely no longer have a place, especially if they saw more children like Arthur. Arthur did lack the variety of spells for a dual-element wizard, but he made up for it with fluid movements and tight control. He was just curious that Arthur was able to defeat a veteran and adventurer, even as sloppy as Geist. But the pressure Arthur showed made Glory curious about what kind of life he had lived to be so strong for a boy Arthur's age. On the other hand, Arthur began to regulate his strength, which made Glory even more curious about what he was doing. Arthur was seen holding his breath. After that, a fire attack hit Arthur's body. Glory naturally felt that Arthur's uniform would soon be destroyed if he continued to act like that. However, Glory, who realized something, immediately asked Torch to fly low. Glory realized that Arthur wasn't doing ordinary wind magic. Arthur was trying to manipulate the air, which required a lot of insight, as well as a higher level of concentration and spellcasting for proper chanting. That's why no wizard was able to suck air from an opponent's lungs. It takes hours of concentration to concentrate on manipulating air directly on a moving living target. That's why witches use their own bodies as a predetermined source or immobile location. Arthur kept his area of influence as close as possible, but even so, to be able to use that method in the middle of a fight was still amazing. On the other hand, Arthur manipulated a thin layer around his body to form a vacuum and obliterate the fire before it hit him. That sounded much easier in his head. In that situation, his uniform would definitely reach the limit before he managed to master it. However, if he managed to penetrate the shield, then the outcome would definitely be different. Meanwhile, Lucas began to panic that Arthur could break through his spell like that. He didn't see Arthur using wind magic. But that didn't matter anymore because he was going to end things now. Lucas raised the barrier with the Flame Guardian spell until a fire monster ran towards Arthur. Arthur smiled as he realized that Lucas had reached his limit. However, that's when Arthur felt strange. He felt a sudden surge of mana. Sylvie immediately informed him that Tessia was in danger. While Arthur still didn't understand what was happening, the Flame Guardian was already at his side to attack. Arthur managed to dodge a little too late. However, he saw the attacking Professor Glory flying with a panicked face. Arthur couldn't wait anymore, so he braced himself to survive so he could finish everything and get out of there to meet Tessia. Arthur had to work quickly because he had used up his mana reserves to learn the vacuum barrier spell earlier. Arthur started to feel the mana surge he felt before again. Arthur suspected that Curtis had released his beast will. Arthur finally saw Tessia, who had absolutely no protective shield around her. Arthur, who was already in pain, felt that it was no longer important. He immediately ran to Tessia and held her tightly in his arms. He already didn't have enough mana to withstand the attack, so it would definitely hurt a lot. Just then, a huge explosion occurred. Earlier, the fight between Curtis and Tessia continued. At that time, Tessia was curious if Arthur was okay. She knew that Arthur would have a hard time using only his two weakest elements. Curtis ran towards Tessia to attack, and she was able to block him. However, Curtis then said that it was a bad habit to take his eyes off his opponent in the middle of battle. Curtis attacked again with his sword, but Tessia was able to dodge. Tessia also counterattacked. Tessia made her ultimate attack that pushed Curtis far back. However, even though her attack was successful, Tessia felt something was wrong with her body. At that moment, Curtis and Grotter moved forward. They were about to begin the kind of attack they had been practicing. Meanwhile, Tessia knew that from the amount of mana Curtis had gathered, they intended to perform a big spell. Hence, Tessia used a nature presence spell. Just then, many large roots emerged from the ground. The roots made it a little difficult for Curtis to move. However, Tessia still felt something was wrong with her core. She couldn't assimilate the Elderwood Guardian core properly. Tessia had thought about giving up, but she couldn't because she was the head of the student council. She wouldn't let others think that she was weak, let alone a coward. Tessia was confident that she could win. Meanwhile, Curtis along with Grotter attacked with the Ward's Howl spell. Grotter spit out a huge flame afterwards. Meanwhile, Tessia's body was getting weaker. Her body wavered and then lost consciousness. Professor Glory appeared hysterically seeing Tessia's condition. As soon as she dismounted from the torch, she immediately realized that Arthur was already there covering Tessia's body. Glory is confused as to how Arthur could be there. Just then Curtis arrives and explains that he didn't mean to knock Tessia out. Glory didn't mind because she knew it. After that, she told De Gaulle to coordinate the students. She also asked Pon to assess the damage. Glory looked back at Arthur and Tessia. She was confused about what had happened. After that, Arthur finally woke up with Sylvie on top of him. Angry Sylvie called Arthur stupid while hitting him on the forehead. Even though Arthur always considered himself very strong, he almost died. Sylvie didn't know what she would do if Arthur was no longer by her side. Arthur apologized and admitted his mistake of being a little careless. He asked Sylvie not to worry because he wouldn't leave her. Sylvie asked if Arthur promised, and he said yes. Just then, someone knocked on the door and Arthur invited him in. Director Goodski enters and admits that he didn't expect Arthur to answer. However, Arthur seems to have come to his senses. He then asked how Arthur was feeling. Arthur revealed that he was a little uneasy because he was seeing the director too often. However, the director felt that Arthur was fine because he could talk like that. Arthur then asked about Tessia's condition. Goodski explained that Tessia was in better shape than Arthur at the moment. Arthur then asked if it was really a beast will that Tessia apparently couldn't overcome. Goodski was surprised how Arthur knew that. Arthur explained that he was the one who gave her the beast will. He should have also helped her assimilate. He didn't expect to be caught in such a situation first. Goodski assured her that the boy had done more than enough. The woman also felt guilty that she had let the information about the beast Tessia remain a secret. She was in the process of assimilating, which made her very vulnerable. If she had told Professor Glory, then it might have been avoided. Goodski then thanked Arthur for sacrificing himself for his student. Arthur asked her to stop because it made her look like a dead person, and the director laughed. Goodski admitted that he had also contacted the royal family as well as her family. They will be arriving soon, so Arthur should rest until then. Arthur thanked Director Goodski, and the woman left the room. Outside the room, Tessia was waiting. Goodski asked if Tessia didn't want to go inside. However, Tessia felt that she couldn't and Arthur needed to rest anyway. So, Goodski then invited Tessia to feast on the delicious desserts that had been brought earlier. At that moment, Tessia left while continuing to stare at Arthur's closed bedroom door. In the silence that permeates time and space, Arthur opened his eyes. The dim light that slipped through the curtains of the hospital window was blinding, reminding him of the last battle that almost took his life. As he tried to remember how he arrived at this place, his memory was interrupted by the figure of Tessia's daughter, Irelith. In his mind, he vividly imagined the heroic moment of risk, when he faced the villains to protect the girl. Her life was at stake in an unexpected spirit, and the courage she showed seemed to awaken the power within her, even though at the same time, she realized the consequences of such actions. The soft voice of his mother, Alice, shattered the reverie. In a soft tone, a mixture of concern and affection wrapped in her voice, she inquired about Arthur's well-being. It was as if she wanted to heal an inner wound that went deeper than just the physical one. Although Arthur tried to smile, it was difficult when the sound came out choked, coupled with the pain that ran through his body. However, the hope of seeing Tessia's smile gave him unexpected strength. Beside her mother, Elia, her mischievous and cheerful sister, stood with a nosy expression on her face. In a mocking tone, Elia couldn't resist making fun of her brother, asserting that their relationship, though full of laughter, was a sign of deep affection. Arthur replied sarcastically, trying to hold back a smile behind the stinging pain. Elia, not to be outdone, challenged back with a playful taunt, pointing out that despite their frequent clashes, the bond between them remained strong. Their father, who always plays the role of mediator, interjects with a stern voice. In a humorous way, he reminds Elia of the time when she cried more than her mother at the sight of Arthur's condition. The Leywins engaged in light-hearted conversation despite the tension behind it. However, her mother's attention quickly returns to Arthur, with concern written all over her face. When she asks how Arthur could have gotten hurt on the first day of school, things get serious. Reynolds, trying to break the ice with humor, stated that his son had always been interested in trouble, and it seemed like he was already fighting before he had time to put on his uniform. Arthur couldn't help but laugh bitterly, even though inwardly he felt a pang. When Alice Lewin frowned and asked who was destroyed, Arthur wanted to distract them from the uncomfortable conversation. Elia, smartly, attempted to diffuse the tension with humor, suggesting that they should not discuss the matter. However, the atmosphere turned serious again when a man's stern voice came from the corner of the room, introducing himself as the Honorable Noble. As the Lewins were surprised and bowed their heads, the noble expressed his gratitude to Arthur, who had saved his daughter twice. Arthur's heart pounded, feeling the weight of the courage he had shown. The noble then introduced his father, the former king of Eleanor, who looked at Arthur with understanding. Suddenly, a young girl stepped forward, introducing herself as Arthur's friend. She was Tessia Erelith. The smile on her face showed how pleased she was. When Alice Lewin stated that her son had often told her about the girl, Tessia's face turned red, and Arthur felt anxiety in his heart. He wondered what his family thought about his relationship with Tessia. The moment of silence was broken by Alice Lewin's whisper that startled Tessia, leaving the girl looking shocked. Tessia's grandfather, Varian Erelith, who was also present, looked at Arthur with eyes full of wisdom, asking how Arthur was doing in a gentle tone. Arthur replied that he was just a little anxious about what they would plan next. A chuckle could be heard from Varian Erelith as he explained that the worst thing was that Arthur would be his grandson's husband, lightening the mood. When Elia heard this, she didn't want to miss out on adding a comment, which made the atmosphere even more cheerful. Arthur looks at Elia and reminds her that it was Tessia who gave him the bow on his birthday. In the midst of this interaction, the sense of connection between Elia and Tessia deepens. However, the atmosphere becomes lively again when Elia challenges Arthur with a simple but intriguing question. Arthur replied that they were both ugly and they were both angry at him. But he felt lucky that he was still sick, so they couldn't express their anger seriously. When the conversation started to return to a more serious atmosphere, Arthur asked Varian Erelith about the girl's manicure. He was curious about Tessia's progress. Varian Erelith explained that Arthur's body was more suited to beast cores after the first integration, and Arthur proudly revealed how he got the beast core from the Elderwood Guardian in a direct and decisive manner. Their conversation was momentarily interrupted when someone cleared their throat, reminding them that Tessia's assimilation needed to be monitored again. The door to the room was opened by Director Goodsky, and several people from outside looked surprised, making some of them fall to their knees and causing a small laugh among the others. After his family and Tessia left, Arthur had to deal with many visits throughout the day. Some people came to ask what exactly happened, while others were there purely out of concern for his well-being. A man approached, his eyes sharply assessing Arthur. Firmly, Professor Gideon stated that once Arthur recovered, he would have to stop practicing in his private room. Arthur was surprised, wondering how the man knew that. The man explained that Director Kudsky asked him to make some training artifacts for Arthur, showing his seriousness and responsibility. Arthur was confused, but at the same time, he realized that he might owe the man a favor. Not long after, Tessia reappeared, her face beaming with joy, bringing news that made Arthur's heart flutter. He inquired about the assimilation session she had gone through, and Tessia explained that she had to stop early because she was still recovering. Although her tone was slightly disappointed, her eyes sparkled with excitement. Arthur nodded, but worry washed over him at the sight of Tessia. When he asked about Tessia's core, Arthur was worried that the girl was still feeling pain or pressure from the process. However, Tessia stifled a small laugh, showing that she was warmed by Arthur's concern. With a smile, Tessia expressed how much she appreciated Arthur's concern, even though Arthur himself still felt pain that reminded him of his physical limitations. At that moment, Arthur thought back to the moments of saving Tessia from the bandits' attack, moments that became precious memories despite the risk. When Tessia expressed her guilt, Arthur tried to provide comfort by patting her shoulder. He wanted to calm her down, assuring her that it was all in the past and there was no need to dwell on it. However, Tessia followed up with an expression that took Arthur by surprise. She leaned closer and kissed Arthur gently, sending a warmth that filled the entire room. Arthur was taken aback by the unexpected action, feeling the whole room tremble for a moment, and his heart skip a beat. After the incident, Arthur tried to keep his composure, though his face was flushed red. He was surprised by this sudden expression of love, feeling awkward yet happy. Tessia explained that she just wanted to thank Arthur, knowing that without him, she might not have been there. Inwardly, Arthur felt a warm feeling fill his soul space. He promised himself to always protect Tessia, no matter what happened in the future. Tessia ran at a fast pace through the deserted corridor after experiencing a deep kiss with Arthur. Her heart beat fast, as if thunder was rumbling inside her chest, breaking the silence of the empty corridor. Cold sweat soaked her temples, and her face flushed a warm red, colored by uncontrollable shame. He paused for a moment in the middle of the corridor, trying to calm his chaotic thoughts, like puzzle pieces that could never fit together. A sense of disbelief swept over her. Having just left Arthur's room, Tessia was now caught up in the awkward feeling that enveloped her. Memories of the first kiss that had just happened haunted her mind. Something that had only existed in dreams now turned into a heavy burden that made it difficult to breathe. She covered her mouth with her hand, as if to hold back all the emotions that almost made her cry. It felt like an all-too-real dream, and Tessia struggled to separate reality from fantasy. The sensation of that deep kiss still lingered on her lips, the warmth that spread through her body, and the doubt that swept through her mind. She lowered her head, her cheeks flushed red, as if all the students in the academy could see and know about the moment. Tessia turned to the window in the corridor, looking for her reflection, trying to judge whether she looked strange or different after the shocking event. With barely suppressed embarrassment, she sat on the floor, feeling the coldness of the tiles through her clothes and making her feel even more alienated and alone. Her mind was filled with doubts about what Arthur would say and think about her. Tessia wondered if she was overreacting in that moment, if her emotional reaction was too dramatic, and felt as if Arthur would judge her inappropriately. She imagined herself going back to her room and pretending that the whole thing was just a joke that never happened, trying to fight the awkward situation that kept haunting her mind. Tessia tried to convince herself that she shouldn't think too much negatively about the situation, even though she felt trapped in a vortex of uncertainty. She recalled how she was often treated like a child whenever she was with Arthur. Discouraged by being underestimated, Tessia tried to cultivate determination and confidence. She smiled to herself, realizing that she was a talented, intelligent, and popular witch at the academy. Given that her looks were no less attractive, Tessia felt a little stronger and was convinced that Arthur would be the one to lose out if he didn't appreciate her. However, uncertainty still surrounds her, and she cannot fully trust that things will turn out as she expects. On the other hand, inside Arthur's medical room, the atmosphere was very different. Arthur was still stunned, lying stiffly with his arms drooping at his sides, caught up in the moment of the sudden kiss. His thoughts and feelings swirled in deep confusion, as if time had stopped to make room for the anxiety he felt. The figure of the girl who had just kissed him, Tessia, haunted his mind. Arthur felt tension run through his body, from head to toe, and in his mind, he cursed himself, wondering if he had done something wrong or unnatural. The uncertainty and confusion made him even more depressed. With his body still in its adolescent stage, and his emotions in turmoil, Arthur felt as if he was trapped in a collision of feelings between curiosity and fear. He felt frustrated, angry, and anxious, but could not calm himself down. Thoughts of Tessia and the kiss kept replaying in his mind, disrupting his concentration and adding to his already heavy emotional burden. When someone knocked on the door, the sound broke his reverie, but Arthur remained silent, trapped in his own thoughts and unable to move or speak. Outside, Cyrus Academy was preparing for the new school year. In 2 days' time, school would start again, and the atmosphere around the academy was filled with the excitement and noise of students chatting, laughter, and cheers echoing through the air. 2 students stood at the corner of the corridor, discussing the latest news regarding the new professor who would be teaching their class, filled with enthusiasm and curiosity about the upcoming changes. Inside the director's office, Arthur was having a discussion with Director Goodsky. He listened carefully as the director asked him if he had prepared any materials for teaching. Despite being newly discharged from the hospital, Arthur is trying to show confidence and readiness to face the challenges ahead of him. They walked across the vast and luxurious room, noticing a man meditating in the corner. However, they simply passed him without speaking, as if he had nothing to do with their discussion. Arthur was worried about his friend Tessia and asked about her assimilation process. Director Goodsky responded with a hopeful smile, giving them encouragement and hope. After speaking with the director, Professor Gideon suddenly appeared, ready to start the training show at the academy. Arthur felt a little relieved and excited to see Professor Gideon, who was known as a training expert with an excellent reputation. With great enthusiasm, Professor Gideon showed him the room filled with various training tools, including the manosphere that was famous among wizards. Arthur was mesmerized by the tools, feeling an enthusiasm to try and master new techniques. The room was filled with a magical aura that energized all present. When Arthur touched the manosphere, a bright light emanated from the sphere, enveloping the entire room and showing the flow of mana within him. The sound of a soft melody echoed throughout the room, energizing everyone present and making Arthur feel proud and confident in mastering his new powers. Elsewhere, Lance Baron and his two companions still stood stunned before the mysterious figure that emerged from the shadows. The figure seemed full of mystery, and with fear and courage, they tried to understand the presence of the figure. The mysterious figure warned them of a great power they did not yet understand, and Lance Baron felt the tension rising, making him feel like he had to prepare for a darkness greater than they had ever imagined. Although they had no malicious intent, the warning gave them a deep sense of urgency and vigilance. While Arthur continued to study and practice with the manosphere, Tessia tried to hide her shame and anxiety. She tried to focus on preparing for the new school year, hoping to take her mind off the disturbing feelings. However, the memory of the kiss with Arthur continues to haunt her, making her feel uncomfortable and alienated amidst the excitement of the academy. Meanwhile, Arthur is trying hard to overcome his confusion and prepare for the new school year with vigor, even though inside him there is still emotional turmoil that has yet to be fully resolved. In other halls of the academy, preparations for the new school year intensified. The academy staff are busy finalizing all the preparations, and the students are preparing to embark on their new adventures. The new school year began with the atmosphere at the Cyrus Academy becoming more lively with the presence of enthusiastic and energetic students. Arthur fought Toby in a fierce battle that tested the limits of both of their abilities. The battle arena, which was previously kept clean and tidy, is now littered with debris and damage from the violent collisions and magical powers unleashed during the battle. Arthur, known as a talented and experienced fighter, utilizes every technique and strategy he has learned to defeat Toby, a robot created to be a formidable opponent. Toby, designed with advanced technology and incredible strength, had a hard time keeping up with Arthur's superior strength and speed. With each attack, Arthur demonstrated not only his physical strength, but also his strategic intelligence. Every move Arthur makes is carefully planned, anticipating Toby's often unpredictable movements. Arthur took advantage of Toby's structural weaknesses that he had identified, such as poorly protected joints and a protective system that was vulnerable to multiple attacks. In a deadly final attack, Arthur managed to break and destroy Toby completely. The robot collapsed to the ground, unable to move, and the remains of the machine littered the arena. On the sidelines, Director Goodsky and Professor Gideon watched the battle with rapt attention. Director Goodsky, known for his calm demeanor and fair evaluation, noticed every detail of the fight. His serious gaze reflected his appreciation of Arthur's effort and skill. Beside him, Professor Gideon, who was known for his arrogance and haughty demeanor, evaluated the fight with a judgmental attitude. Although his face showed little expression, his expression showed that he considered every detail of the fight for evaluation. Elijah, Arthur's close friend, stood at the edge of the arena with a concerned expression on his face. Seeing the damage done to Toby, Elijah felt sad and concerned for the robot's fate. Although Toby was just a machine, Elijah understood that this battle was not just about physical strength, but also about Arthur's technical and strategic abilities. He felt that Arthur had given his best in this fight and felt empathy for his good friend who now looked tired and injured. After the fight ended, Professor Gideon approached Arthur with an appraising step. Gideon's usual haughty and arrogant demeanor seemed to have dropped a bit this time. With a sharp gaze and a voice full of judgment, Gideon expressed his concern for Arthur's condition. He scrutinized every wound and sign of fatigue on Arthur's body, as if these details were material for his judgment. Gideon, despite his reputation for pretense, showed this time that he was not completely indifferent to his student's condition. However, his delivery still seemed to lack empathy. He suggested that Arthur rest immediately to recover, though his tone of voice showed more arrogance than genuine concern. Director Goodsky, who also approached Arthur, showed a more caring attitude. Although he didn't say much, Goodsky's gaze and demeanor reflected genuine concern for Arthur's well-being. He understood that Arthur had given his maximum effort in the fight and ensured that Arthur received the necessary treatment for recovery. Director Goodsky took note of Arthur's condition and decided to take the necessary steps to ensure that Arthur received adequate rest and care. Arthur, despite being sore and tired, gave constructive feedback on Toby's weaknesses. He explained that the joints on the robot were a very significant weak point and suggested that strengthening be done better in the future. Arthur also highlighted the limitations in Toby's protective system, which was unable to deal with constant attacks. He suggested the use of a series of interconnected armor plates, which could repair the barrier more quickly and avoid unnecessary waste of mana. Arthur's input showed his deep thinking and understanding of the technology used in the robot. Professor Gideon and Director Goodsky listened carefully to Arthur's input. Although Gideon seemed reluctant to acknowledge Arthur's suggestions, Director Goodsky showed respect for Arthur's views. They realized that while the implementation of Arthur's proposed shielding system might take longer in the beginning, it offered greater flexibility than the traditional shielding methods often used. Director Goodsky decided to present Arthur's suggestion to the Wizard Guild for further opinions on its potential implementation. This move showed that Arthur's suggestion was being taken seriously and could lead to a change in the methods used in the future. After Director Goodsky left the arena, Professor Gideon looked at Arthur carefully. Gideon's gaze was full of curiosity and keen judgment. He seemed more focused on deeply assessing Arthur's abilities and condition than on empathizing with his student. Arthur felt confused and a little uncomfortable with the attention. Although Gideon claimed that he was only checking Arthur's condition, his judgmental and measuring attitude made Arthur feel uncomfortable. However, Arthur understands that this is part of the evaluation process of a professor with a high reputation in the academy. Meanwhile, outside the arena, students were passing by with energetic conversations. Arthur walked alone with the cane he used to help alleviate the pain in his leg. He pondered and recalled the fight with Toby. The realization that he probably shouldn't have fought two level 7 Toby when he wasn't fully recovered made him reflect on the decisions and strategies he made during the fight. He began to realize that there might be a need to be more careful and pay attention to his physical condition before engaging in a big fight. When Arthur arrived at the classroom where he would be teaching, Cathil, a dark-haired girl and royal princess, helped him in. Arthur was surprised at the attention he received upon entering the classroom. Cathil then went to her own seat, showing support and kindness that made Arthur feel a little better. Cathil's presence provided some comfort amidst the tense atmosphere. In the classroom, an ominous atmosphere greeted Arthur's arrival as their new professor. The students were skeptical and showed their distrust of the school's decision to use a first-year student as a teacher. Some students even openly complained. Arthur realized how energetic the students were in resisting his presence, and he thought that this situation might have been avoided if a senior professor had been present with him to provide additional support. When one of the students, Lester, jumped in front of Arthur with a confident and brash attitude, Arthur faced a direct challenge. Lester, trying to show that he was more experienced and challenging Arthur in a defiant manner, tried to provoke Arthur. Lester's friends encouraged him to confront Arthur, but Arthur quickly took action and knocked Lester down with one efficient move, surprising the other students. This action by Arthur showcased his skills and established his authority in front of the skeptical students. Arthur reflected on how strange this situation was and how the challenges he faced could be valuable lessons. While the presence of senior professors might have eased the tension, Arthur knew that he had to face this challenge head-on. He was determined to prove his worth as a professor and overcome the skepticism of the students in a positive and constructive way. With vigor and determination, Arthur prepared for the days ahead at the academy and committed to making a meaningful contribution to teaching and learning. He realizes that every challenge he faces is an opportunity to grow and develop his skills and abilities as a teacher and a fighter. Lester fell to the classroom floor with a face that expressed deep shock and confusion. His body drooped limply, as if all the courage and spirit within him had vanished in an instant. Lester's eyes were wide open, and his expression showed disbelief at the situation that had just occurred. Around him, the students were silent, watching the event with shocked and astonished gazes. Their lips were pressed tightly together, and some of them seemed to be holding their breath, reflecting their shock and discomfort at the situation that had just unfolded. Arthur stood at the front of the class with a sturdy and authoritative posture, his gaze assessing Lester, who was now on the floor. Arthur's demeanor suggests that he sees this incident as an opportunity to assess and direct Lester. The atmosphere of the classroom is filled with a sense of tension and awkwardness that pervades the entire room. Arthur, in a challenging tone, watches Lester as if he is waiting for Lester's decision to get back up or stay where he is. With what was left of his courage, Lester slowly stood up from the floor. His body was still shaking slightly, but he tried hard to keep his posture straight. Deep respect and regret were evident on his face as he directed a remorseful gaze at Arthur. Lester then moved quickly to his seat, avoiding the judgmental gaze of his friends. The atmosphere in the classroom changed drastically with his reaction, with several students either lowering their heads or exchanging embarrassed glances. Arthur noticed this change in the mood of the class and could not hide the cynical smile that appeared at the corner of his lips. He saw clearly that the mood of the students had changed from surprise to embarrassment and awkwardness. Arthur then continued the lesson with confidence, announcing that today would be a productive day with many students actively involved in the class. His voice sounded full of passion and authority, exuding confidence in controlling the atmosphere. The lesson began with Arthur asking a practical question that tested the students' understanding of how to utilize mana from the surrounding environment. Arthur watched the students attentively, expecting intelligent and insightful answers. The question focused the whole class's attention on a topic relevant to their practice. Ponytail. A girl with red hair tied in a ponytail immediately raised her hand and gave an answer. Excitedly, Ponytail explained that the best way to utilize mana was to absorb the mana formed in the atmosphere into their mana cores. He went on to explain the process of condensation and purification of mana needed to effectively cast spells or techniques. Arthur gave sincere praise to Ponytail for her precise and profound answer. He then went on to explain the difference between an augmenter and a conjurer. Arthur explained that augmenters generally use the mana in their core through mana tunnels, while conjurers utilize mana directly from their surroundings. This explanation is followed by a description of the importance of meditation and mana filtering in both types of mages, as well as how different methods affect their mana management. Ponytail added that although conjurers rarely use mana in physical attacks, they still need the ability to manipulate mana in the atmosphere in order to form spells effectively. Arthur emphasized that conjurers use their own mana that has been tailored to specific spells, so that the ambient mana can better follow the directions given. He emphasized that conjurers usually use less mana in their spells compared to augmenters. Arthur then sparked confusion among the students by asking a question about whether the color of the mana core could be used to accurately determine a wizard's level. The students looked confused and pondered the question seriously. Arthur suggested that they keep this question in mind for further consideration in the future. Arthur asked 6 students with elemental affinity to come forward and stand in front of him. He divided them into 2 groups, conjurers on the left and augmenters on the right. 6 students, including Kathilm, Ponytail, and a blonde-haired student who was Arthur's rival, Perith, followed the instructions. They stood in a serious manner, ready to begin the exercise Arthur had instructed them to do. The exercise began with Arthur asking the students to perform basic spells according to their element. He emphasized that conjurers were not allowed to use sticks in this exercise. The training process involved various elements, such as water, fire, and earth. Arthur asked the augmenters to cast their spells, while the conjurers were instructed to carefully reabsorb the spells they had prepared. The exercise soon descended into chaos as the elements collided with each other, creating a chaotic and disorganized situation. Arthur noticed Kathilm, who seemed to have almost mastered the water element quite well. On the other hand, male students with fire and earth elements complained about the process. They felt that reabsorbing prepared spells did not give the desired results, and only top-level spells could be used for effective ranged attacks. Arthur decided to give a live example to demonstrate the elemental abilities. He smashed the wall using the elemental power he controlled. The rumbling sound and flying dust added to the sense of power of the demonstration. Arthur explained that although conjurers use less mana in their spells, their ability to properly absorb the spell is crucial to achieving optimal results. He realized that although it was not difficult to do so, he doubted whether any augmenter could do it perfectly at the orange stage. Arthur emphasized the importance of the conjurer's ability to absorb spells and how it provided an advantage in combat and training. After the demonstration, Arthur gave the students who wanted to try their skills the opportunity to come down and do so. When the class ended, students began to leave the classroom one by one. Some of them were still talking about the training and experience they had just undergone. Arthur and Sylve, the little fox who was always with him, decided to sit on a bench outside the room, away from the crowd and the noise of the class. Arthur enjoyed the quiet time after class, feeling the satisfaction of a lesson well done. Sylve, who was distracted by the butterflies fluttering around her, seemed relaxed and content with the situation. Arthur was proud of his accomplishments as a professor and of the way the day's lesson had gone. Kathilm approached Arthur eagerly, showing her gratitude for the lesson. Even without conversation, the atmosphere of the class and the dynamics that took place had left a deep impression on Arthur and the students. That day, the class was not only about learning techniques, but also about personal growth and a deeper understanding of their own strengths. Kathilm then told Arthur she had something to say. Arthur walked with heavy steps towards the outside area after class. His heart and mind were racing with questions and worries. He felt surprised and confused about Kathlyn's feelings towards him, especially those words that made him feel anxious. Did Kathlyn, who had always seemed stubborn and showed no weakness, actually harbor special feelings for him? This question continued to haunt Arthur's mind, adding to the already disturbing sense of unease. Arthur also felt anxious about the potential impact of Kathlyn's feelings. He was worried that this could spark conflict between the 3 races, given the background and long history between the races. Arthur is distressed by long-standing problems, such as the incident at the auction house involving Kathlyn's family, Kathlyn's father's actions that once harmed him, and the mistake Kathlyn's brother made on the day of the celebration. These problems didn't seem to be fully resolved, and now they surfaced again in an unexpected way. As Arthur stood outside the room, he felt the same tension as when he first experienced the incident. Although he had tried to forget and move on from the problems, every time he faced Kathlyn, all the memories came back. With a heart full of worries, Arthur decided to make a request to Kathlyn. He hoped that the request would be accepted for the good of his family, and so that old problems would not add to the tension between them. Kathlyn, on the other hand, was astonished and a little angry at how Arthur was still affected by the events of 4 years ago. Although she had always respected her father and understood how much he had influenced Arthur's life, she felt that it was time to move on. Kathlyn admitted to herself that her father had let her down in many ways, especially in matters involving family and responsibility. However, she did not expect that these issues still haunted Arthur. In addition, Kathleen felt frustrated with the expectations and pressures coming from her racial heritage. According to her racial tradition, sharing physical closeness is only allowed with close friends, and this often made her feel pressured. Kathleen felt strange having to follow rules that made interpersonal relationships complicated and sometimes uncomfortable. In her heart, Kathleen felt that these expectations were unfair and often restricted individual freedom. Arthur was surprised when Kathleen revealed that she didn't think of their relationship as physical closeness. He didn't know how to react, given Kathleen's reputation and intelligence. Given how meticulous Kathleen is in her view of things, Arthur feels confused and unsure about how he should respond. He wondered if Kathleen's real purpose was to discuss the different results of the 2 spells they learned in magic class. Arthur felt anxious that the topic should not be the main focus of their current conversation. Kathleen, on the other hand, tried to change the subject to avoid things getting more serious. She felt that discussing the different results of the spell would not solve the deeper issues between them. Kathleen just wanted to distract Arthur from the personal and emotional issues that made both of them feel awkward. She felt that talking about magic spells would be easier than having to discuss unexpressed feelings. Arthur was hesitant to help his highly intelligent student, especially when he felt unsure about how best to support her. Although he knew that Kathleen was a talented student with great potential, Arthur felt that he had to be careful not to give her help that was not in line with his expectations. In his heart, Arthur felt that providing inappropriate help could worsen the situation and make their relationship more complicated. Meanwhile, Kathleen also showed concern for Arthur after his injury on the first day of class. She asked how Arthur was doing and if he was feeling better. Arthur was touched and grateful for Kathleen's concern, even though he felt he didn't deserve it. Arthur confirmed that he was fine and thanked Kathleen for her concern, hoping that this would improve the atmosphere between them. Elsewhere, Arthur and Emily were discussing the main components of the basic light-producing artifact in the context of magic. Emily explained in detail that the artifact was made of the foundation crystal, fluorinite, which was found near the outskirts of Sapin and the Darv Kingdom. Once refined, the fluorinite would continue to emit a faint light. Emily explained that to control the output of the ore, specialized knowledge and skills in magic were required. Arthur was impressed by Emily's explanation and realized how important it was to understand the basic components of making magic artifacts. Emily, who seemed to be very passionate about this topic, offered one of the artifacts she had made for fun. Arthur was very grateful for the offer and was honored to receive one of Emily's artifacts. This offer made Arthur feel closer to Emily and feel that he had someone he could rely on in matters related to magic. Elijah then appears and tells Arthur that Director Goodsky asked him to meet with him. Emily and Elijah greeted each other, and after a brief introduction, Arthur proceeded to meet Tessia in her training room. They began the assimilation session with Arthur's help, although the atmosphere between them was awkward. Tessia felt uncomfortable with the situation and asked Arthur if he was angry because of the kiss Tessia gave him. Arthur revealed that he was just surprised, and Tessia was relieved to hear his response. Tessia then expressed her concern that Arthur was avoiding her. Although Arthur explained that they were young and he felt he was not ready for marriage, Tessia felt that this explanation was not entirely satisfactory. Tessia felt that Arthur was overconfident in many areas, such as magic, combat, and intelligence. However, she also felt that Arthur did not fully master some important aspects of interpersonal relationships. Tessia felt that Arthur often pretended not to care and tried to reduce his emotional burden. She felt that Arthur was immature, especially in the way he rejected Lilia. Tessia felt mixed and confused about how to proceed with their relationship. When Tessia left, she felt deeply mixed feelings and left Arthur with unanswered questions. Arthur felt confused about how Tessia knew personal things about him. He felt depressed and frustrated at not being able to openly disclose his past. Arthur felt that he had to keep secrets about his age and past, which made him feel alienated and depressed. He tries to understand Tessia's feelings and how they affect their relationship, while struggling to cope with his own emotions. With all the uncertainty and complexity involving personal feelings and relationships, Arthur feels that his future is becoming increasingly unclear. He realizes that in order to achieve greater understanding and maturity, he must face the challenges and conflicts in his life more boldly and openly. Arthur struggled in the fierce battle against Toby. Every movement felt heavy, and his focus was distracted by Tessia's words that kept ringing in his mind. Although fatigue was beginning to eat away at his strength, Arthur continued to fight with what spirit he had left. Toby, a skilled and formidable opponent, gave him no chance to rest. Arthur's courage and resolve were tested with every attack, but the image of Tessia continued to loom over him, disrupting his concentration. Over time, the emotional burden Arthur carried became too much. A deep sense of exhaustion finally overcame his spirit, and he was forced to pause at the edge of the arena. Amidst the silence of the training room, Arthur sat on the floor with a face that showed exhaustion and confusion. His breathing was labored, and he pondered silently. He thought about all of Tessia's words that made him feel guilty and uneasy. Every word Tessia said seemed to change the way he saw himself and the actions he had taken. Sylve, who had been watching Arthur with concern from the beginning, approached. With gentle steps, she approached Arthur, trying to provide some much-needed moral support. Sylve, with a thoughtful and slightly worried expression, reminded Arthur not to push himself too hard. He realized how much pressure Arthur was under and gently emphasized the importance of adhering to physical restrictions during the recovery period. Although Arthur felt able to continue training, Sylve's concern was palpable, adding to the emotional burden he was already carrying. In the middle of the conversation, a female professor, Professor Glory, entered the room. With a professional appearance, Professor Glory displayed a serious and caring demeanor. She immediately asked the reason for Arthur and Tessia's absence from class. Professor Glory's voice was firm yet gentle, expressing deep concern for their absence. The professor mentioned that Tessia was not present with him, and he reminded Arthur of his obligation to attend class. Although Arthur had private training facilities, it didn't seem to override his academic responsibilities. In response, Arthur felt heavy-hearted and depressed. He felt he had to explain his and Tessia's absence, while realizing how important the lessons were that should not be overlooked. The pressure of these absences added to his already existing mental burden, making it even harder to focus on practice and study. When Arthur entered the classroom, he was still bothered by thoughts of Tessia and the judgment of his peers. Meanwhile, whispers among the other students further disrupted his concentration. Lucas, Charles, and Marcos, 3 students known to be mischievous and arrogant, whispered in a mocking tone. Lucas sarcastically mentioned that Arthur only practiced in a private practice room and did not deserve any special attention. Charles and Marcos added condescending remarks, as if asserting their dominance in a humiliating way. Arthur felt oppressed by these comments, and his frustration deepened. Although he knew that there were still many students who did not accept Arthur as their professor now, the impact of their words was still felt. They were trying to assert their superiority through arrogant behavior, and Arthur felt pressured by the constant social pressure. When Professor Maynor called Arthur's name, he greeted him with a thoughtful tone. The professor seemed pleased that Arthur was finally present after recovering from his injury. In a hopeful tone, Professor Maynor asked Arthur to explain about spell formation. Arthur, although still distracted by his thoughts, tried to answer well. The explanation of spell formation, which is combining or changing basic spells and skills to produce different effects, required great concentration. Arthur tried hard to understand and explain appropriately, despite the emotional urges that kept interfering. Professor Maynor continued the explanation by mentioning how important it was to understand the basic aspects before discussing spell formations further. He explained how thoughts and feelings can affect the spell and its outcome. With great care, Professor Maynard gave examples of how certain words can affect one's emotions and change the outcome of a spell. For example, he described how a statement such as "always love you" can trigger an automatic reaction from someone who hears it, which may be a grimace of disgust or even a slap to the face. This explanation opened up new insights for Arthur on how thoughts and feelings can affect the power of a spell. Arthur was mesmerized by the explanation. Every word from Professor Maynard felt like a key that opened a new window in his mind. He began to realize that in order to make the most of the power of spells, he needed to control his thoughts and feelings. While Lucas, Charles, and Marco's comments were still annoying, Arthur felt more motivated to not let them affect his spirit. As the class continued, Arthur tried to stay focused and not let the negative attitudes of his peers affect his spirit. Although the pressure was still there, Arthur tried to see them as a challenge to strengthen himself. He was determined not to let their comments and attitudes stop him from achieving his goals. Arthur began to understand that true strength lies not only in physical or technical ability, but also in the ability to deal with social and emotional pressures. Arthur was determined to face challenges with a positive attitude and stay focused on his goals. As the class drew to a close, Arthur felt a change in his attitude. He felt more prepared to face the next challenge with renewed vigor and stronger determination. With a better understanding of how thoughts and feelings can affect the power of a spell, Arthur was determined to continue learning and practicing more vigorously. He realized that in order to make meaningful progress, he needed to overcome challenges from outside and within himself. Arthur stepped out of the classroom with mixed feelings. Although he had gained valuable insights from Professor Maynard, the anxiety and fatigue that still weighed on him made it difficult for him to fully enjoy his accomplishment. As he crossed the deserted hallways of Cyrus Academy, he wished he could return to the private training room to ease his mind. However, his hopes soon faded as he saw Lucas, Charles, and Marcos standing in the middle of the hallway, as if waiting for his presence. Lucas, Charles, and Marcos were students known for their arrogant and often troublesome attitudes. They stood in a row in the rather narrow hallway, with challenging expressions and scornful attitudes. Lucas, with his well-built body and sharp gaze, seemed to be the most dominant among them. Charles, with a face full of pride and a defiant attitude, stood beside him, while Marcos, who was usually more reserved, flashed a sardonic smile that made the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. Arthur felt his throat dry up, and his heart beat faster as he approached the group. He knew that their attitude was not something that could be ignored. They would often find fault or trouble with their peers, and today it seemed Arthur was their target. Although he tried to remain calm, he felt pressured by their presence and the potential confrontation that might ensue. The hallway of Cyrus Academy, which was grand and cool, seemed like a peaceful place at first glance. The surrounding stone walls were filled with historical paintings depicting various important events in the Academy's history. The paintings exude vibrant colors that contrast with the gray stone walls, creating a colorful yet elegant atmosphere. The high ceilings seemed to soar into the sky, giving a majestic impression that enveloped every step taken in this hallway. Arthur strode steadily through the hallway, each step vibrating beneath his feet. Sylve, his favorite little fox, stepped beside him with light and elegant steps. Sylve had soft, reddish-brown fur, with bright and thoughtful eyes, as if she could read Arthur's emotions. Although the hallway was quiet, Arthur felt the tension lurking around every corner. It felt like something was ready to explode, waiting for the right moment to launch a threat. As Arthur neared the end of the hallway, the peace was shattered by the appearance of Lucas and his two friends, Marcos and Charles. Lucas walked with a confident stride, his expression one of deep anger and hatred. His handsome face now looked fierce, with eyes that radiated a menacing fire of anger. When he saw Arthur, his gaze seemed to want to pierce through Arthur's magical layers of protection. Lucas's screams echoed down the deserted hallway, spreading the overwhelming hatred and causing a rumble in Arthur's heart. Arthur felt his heart rate increase. Every rumble of Lucas' voice seemed to pierce his heart. The shouting was not only physically threatening, but also tested his mental endurance. Arthur knew that every word Lucas spoke was filled with hatred and ill will. In his heart, Arthur felt trapped in a game he didn't choose, where his reputation was at stake and his future felt threatened. Although he tried to remain calm, Lucas' angry face made him feel cornered. The situation became even more tense when Marcos, Lucas's friend who was known for his temper and large frame, stepped forward with his body tensed in anger. Marcos was known as someone who did not hesitate to use violence to solve problems. He issued a more severe accusation, accusing Arthur of using witchcraft to seduce Princess Kathleen. The accusation was like a punch straight to Arthur's heart, leaving him stunned and confused. Every word from Marcos felt like a painful whip, and anger and confusion were mixed up inside him. Arthur felt trapped in a situation that was only getting worse. He realized that his reputation was now at stake, and he had to maintain his honor. As Marcos stepped closer, Arthur felt the pressure mounting. Every beat of his heart felt like time was slowing down. He knew that if he didn't act soon, the situation could turn into a more severe physical conflict. Arthur tried to figure out a solution in his head, thinking of what steps he could take to resolve the issue without damaging his reputation. Lucas, with a satisfied smile on his face, seemed to be enjoying the tension. He seemed happy to see Arthur in a corner, as if all this trouble was a game that satisfied him. The atmosphere in the hallway grew tense, attracting the attention of several students who stopped to see what was going on. Some of them looked anxious, while others seemed interested in the unfolding drama. Arthur felt all eyes on him, adding to the weight of his burden. He felt like he was in the center of the main stage, with the entire academy watching his every move. The tension was getting the better of the situation, and Arthur knew he had to make a decision soon. If he didn't act, the situation could get worse. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself despite the mounting tension. By then, however, Marcos had already been provoked. With an overflowing rage, Marcos began to gather mana, preparing a devastating attack. The magic aura he created made the air around them feel heavy and full of energy. Arthur knew that if he did not act immediately, Marcos could launch a very dangerous attack. Within seconds, Arthur focused his magical power, setting up defenses against the attack that threatened him. A magical explosion shook the room, the magical energy emitting a dazzling light and creating a stunning yet terrifying flash of color. When the explosion occurred, Marcos was thrown back, falling unconscious on the floor. Arthur felt guilty, even though he knew that he had only done what was necessary to protect him. With Marcos now helpless, there was silence. Claire, a student with long red hair, ran into the room with a worried look on her face. Claire's anxiety deepened when she saw Marcos' terrible condition, badly injured and unconscious. Claire immediately ran over to Marcos and Arthur to see what was happening. The Academy's medical team that arrived soon after took over and transported Marcos to the infirmary, leaving Claire to provide the necessary information. Arthur felt a deep sense of guilt seeing Marcos severely injured, as if a dark shadow was following his steps. Although Arthur knew that he had acted to protect him, the guilt still plagued his heart. While Claire coordinated with the medical team, Arthur felt the pressure mounting. He realized that this situation was not just about him. There were bigger consequences to face. He was determined to help evacuate Marcos to safety, realizing that amidst all the conflict and hardship, there was hope to make things right, even amongst enemies. In his mind, he envisioned how he could reconcile this complicated situation and hope to find a peaceful resolution. After Marcos was finally treated by the medical team and taken out of the room, the atmosphere was calmer. However, Arthur knew that this was not the end of the matter. The tension between him and Marcos would only fester further. As he gazed at Sylve beside him, his beloved little fox offered support by nuzzling his head into Arthur's hand, as if to provide some much-needed comfort at this time. They both stepped out of Cyrus Academy, ready to face the greater challenges ahead. Arthur realized that although he had overcome this clash, an even bigger fight was still waiting on the horizon. As Marcos was quickly attended to by the medical team at Cyrus Academy, the medical room was filled with a pungent antiseptic scent, adding to the sense of seriousness and tension that had yet to fully subside. In the silence that remained, Arthur felt the heavy weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that he had to prepare for the next challenge that was bigger than ever, and hoped to find a solution that could bring peace and resolve this growing conflict.